So, are you surprised when there's announcements that smaller trucking companies are going out of business? uh, you know, I don't wish bad luck on anybody, but it's normal. That should be expected in a down economy. Um, there's no guarantee that small businesses are going to survive uh, downward pressure in a slowing economy. It's like there's a news that ABC Trucking laid off 100 drivers and went out of business. Well, of course they did. That's normal. It's normal for companies to begin, start up, run for a while, face economic hardship, slow down, lay off, and then close. That's a normal life cycle of a small business. Um, it'd be great if the business environment would allow small businesses to run eternal. But what would happen is, as the economy remains strong, more and more small businesses are created. So the good times don't last forever. They eventually, do have to come down. What goes up must come down. This is a fundamental principle in the business world, is that, businesses that grow, businesses expand, businesses contract, businesses die. It's normal. It's perfectly normal. So when you see, for example, people say, well, what's wrong? There must be something wrong. It's like, no, not really. There's nothing wrong. This is not, you can't expect these small businesses to endure long term, through every economic hardship. They do well when the economy does well, but they don't have the staying power when the economy takes a downturn. So it's like, well, there must be something wrong with the economy. There must be something wrong with trucking. There's a reason for this. It's like, well, no, that there's nothing that you could point to that you could fix. Because short of having government control, which would be like communism, you know, it, companies start up and then companies shut down. So when you're an owner operator, you're an independent contractor, and you're thinking about who are you going to lease your truck to. You want to think about that company. Do they have staying power? Can they withstand the ups and downs of the economy? Can they withstand the change in politics from Democrat administrations, Republican administrations, good politics, bad politics, good trade policy, bad trade policy, tariffs, whatever storms are on the horizon, can the company that you're leased on with, can they withstand it? And people wonder, I've often been asked, well, why do you stay with Crete? And it's like, well, Crete's a pretty big company, and they could withstand a lot. They've been around for, quite some time, and it's stable. The customers are stable. The products that you haul are stable. They're not subject to the whims of the spot market. It's contract freight. So they have some of the best contracts in the industry. Walmart loads and Kimberly-Clark, for example, General Mills, as does Warner, as does Schneider. Everywhere I go, there's a Schneider truck right there alongside me. So these big box carriers have the best contracts. And when you see downturns in the economy, and the small companies are struggling, that's normal. That's perfectly normal. That should be expected. Of course they are. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with the industry, or the economy. That's perfectly normal in the business world. When the economy is booming, these little small companies do great. They can't hire enough drivers fast enough. But when the economy takes a downturn, then they close their doors and 100 drivers are let go. So this is perfectly normal. Um, I think it's actually pretty healthy for the industry to contract during downturns. Airlines go through the same thing. When there's less air travel, the airline industry contracts. So then you see things like mergers and acquisitions. You see big fish eating small fish. You see the big airlines buying up the smaller airlines. And this is good for the industry. Because now there's less waste, there's less inefficiency, and you could streamline some of these processes. Now, too much contraction is not good, because then you start getting towards monopolies. But I think it's not unusual during down times that there is contraction in the industry. There'll become less and less players, and only the strongest survive. Right? This is kind of like the theory of evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution. The strongest survive. The weak ones are either die off or they're eaten by the larger predators. So if you're gonna choose a company to sign on with, you got to think about their survivability. I mean, if you lease your truck onto a company that only has 100 drivers, that's not really secure or stable. They may be doing well at the time that you signed on, but maybe the economy was doing well at that time. And then when things turn south, they may close their doors and leave you high and dry. So this is why I encourage owner operators to think about the big box carriers. They have the most to offer. Like Crete, 80% drop and hook, a wide variety of regions or types of driving you could do. And they could withstand almost anything. Pandemics, slowdowns, trade wars. A lot of the ports right now are slow, but we don't haul a lot of products from the ports. So the normal customer base for Crete remains strong. So as your lease company is strong, then your small business is also strong. So you are strong together. Whereas if you're with a smaller mom and pop operation, there's nothing you can do to save that company. It's going down. It was a good run, but the run has ended. And it's like, well, what can you do to fix that? There's nothing you can do to fix that. That's normal market forces at work. It is kind of like supply and demand. And if the demand for all this capacity that small trucking companies have, if that demand goes down, then they got too much equipment, too much overhead, not going to make it. So it always seems nice to dream about starting your own trucking company and hiring 10 drivers, but you got to think about, can you survive the ups and downs of trucking? I've heard things like, if you want to make $1 million in trucking, first you got to start out with 2 million. So economies of scale is really important in the trucking industry, which means bigger is better. Economies of scale. As things get bigger, they become less expensive. Because you could buy in bulk, you could buy in volume, you could lower the costs, you can realize more savings. So a fleet of 5,000 drivers and 10,000 trailers is going to have advantage because of the economies of scale versus a fleet of 10 drivers and 20 trailers. So yeah, when I see the trucking news and it says this trucking company went out of business, it's like, well, okay, not a shock, that was kind of expected. um, or you see sad stories of drivers being laid off. Those drivers are quickly rehired if they're good. If they have a good driving record, safe driving record, they will be quickly rehired by another carrier. Now they may not like that, but at least they have that opportunity to go to another carrier. So you'll see contraction in the industry, and I would suggest you just look at that as perfectly normal. That is perfectly normal. Now, a lot of things that are ailing the industry was generated by Congress. So as Congress creates the rules, corporations act accordingly. So if you don't like the regulations, it's not necessarily the companies that can do a lot about it. This is regulated by Congress, by the government. So if you don't like the new changes in the rules and regulations, you got to go through Congress to get changes to be passed. But the industry responds to Congress. So the things that are wrong in the industry are a reflection of things that are wrong in Congress. So if you want better rules and regulations, you first got to get better politicians. You got to support organizations like OOIDA and then cast your ballot during elections. You want trucking industry to get better, I would suggest you start at Congress. because these companies have to operate within a legal framework. So they're highly efficient. They're doing the best that they possibly can as allowed by Congress. But with the market going up and down, up and down, up and down, well, the strongest will survive. And it's sad to see these small companies go out of business, but also you got to recognize that as normal. It would be abnormal if they didn't go out of business, because how could they possibly survive a downward economy? They can't. They just can't. They don't have the economies of scale. So they only survive when the good times are good. When the times are tough, the strongest survive. So when you think about leasing your truck, think about the strength of that company. And in trucking, bigger is better. Better benefits, better pay, better load offers, better equipment, better financing, better insurance rates, better fuel savings. It's very, very hard to beat a big box carrier and what they have to offer for independent contractors. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.